welcome to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, game masters, and enthusiasts like Josh and myself. I am Dan. With me, of course, is Josh.
I am Josh.
There you are.
Hi, everybody.
And on today's podcast, we'll be discussing all things quizzical and binarical. I'm making up a word, but we're going to invoke Jen as the two-faced guide because we're going to talk about dual disciplines after we answer everyone's emails that we have today. So where did I stick?
Not a lot of emails, but we've got a couple, and
we got a few.
We'll handle those because it's been a couple of weeks, so we will answer some emails.
We're actually preempting.
No emails yet in response to our most recent episode on spirits. Hopefully it is just a matter of time.
Yeah, it's because
or maybe we did such a great job that people will not have any questions about them.
Yeah, did that one just launch today? Or was it last week?
That episode went live today.
Okay, yeah,
as of this recording.
So, yes. So nothing big there. We actually got one from Doomsy, as he shall be called, because he actually started off with, hello.
Yes.
First, as far as how I'd like to be addressed publicly, please refer to me as Doomsy. You got it.
Doomsy.
We're not going to give anybody your real name, because hopefully Doomsy is not your real name, but that's just me. I like nicknames. I'm fine with them. I love them. My question is in regards to naming conventions for name givers in the setting. While I agree that players should name their characters as they see fit and matches the backstory they've created, I also want to maintain cultural and thematic naming norms as they would exist in-world. That being said, many other systems give name examples that set a tone for the feel of a certain ancestry of name giver. Is there guidance you can give for naming various name givers, or for places we create in Barsave for that matter? Love the show. Thank you all. Doomsy.
No.
I actually found in the Red Brick Name Givers Compendium.
Yeah, I was going to say the only thing that there is in the Name Givers Compendium from 3rd edition, there are some suggested male and female names by race. I don't know where they came up with those, because those weren't taken from any previous publication.
Nope. Those were all brand new to me. And that's the only place they're listed.
They might possibly be like pulled from, we went and we took all of the names from previous books that were dwarves and looked at any kind of pattern there. And we did the same for other stuff.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know. Because I looked through, because I remembered that those were there, and it took me about a half an hour to find them, because they weren't in anything 4th edition, as you know, because you oversaw the line. But they weren't in anything 3rd edition. I checked those books first. And I knew, having done this for 20-odd years, that they were not in 1st edition or 2nd edition. So that Red Brick Compendium is the only place I could find those.
As far as I know, that's the only place that had them. You know, you can sort of, if you want to try and make a nod towards consistency for those languages that we have some created vocabulary for, and understand that with the created vocabulary for various languages in Earthdawn, there is not necessarily any strong consistency with them. But you can look at the words that we do have and use those as an indication for the kind of sounds and phonemes that are
how they make the syllables
common among that language, and then just kind of go off of that.
Yeah, otherwise I steal names from sci-fi fantasy books all over the place, so have at it.
Yeah, there hasn't been anything in my years of swimming in the setting and lore. Nothing has popped out at me in terms of how, like, consistency or anything along those lines. I think you just go with whatever seems to work in the moment.
I know the only thing Josh will probably agree with me on is that anything in Tiskrang has a lot of apostrophes. And those are almost...
No. The apostrophe in Tiskrang language should serve a specific glottal stop purpose, and not just dropped in for the sake of dropping apostrophes because it's Tiskrang fantasy. And I made the, like, waving my hands motion there for Dan's benefit.
Air quotes.
Which none of you listening at home can hear.
Air quotes to Scrang Fantasy. Air quotes. Yes.
Yes. Generally speaking, like, Tiskrang does tend to have a lot of, I feel like, harder consonants. Mm-hmm. I've always kind of pictured Tiskrang as not actually really having any lips. And so consequently, like they'll have a lot of T's and K's and sibilants, like where they'll be able to make sounds with their tongue against the roof of their
palate,
mouth and whatnot. But P's and B's and whatnot. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but when I'm creating names or words for descrying, I try and avoid those because it just strikes me that they would have a hard time. Like, they don't really have lips, and so would have a hard time pronouncing them. That's just me.
Fair.
There's nothing like,
that's absolutely
there's
fair.
nothing like official in any of the books that says, and descrying don't have lips.
No,
it feels like that's how their language should, and words and stuff should be.
The only thing I could find when looking for the reference today in the Red Brick Name Givers Compendium was, I think that a lot of elfin names were just a lot of soft consonants, but that's just an impression, not a hard and fast rule. That's just what I remember or came across, or at least analyzed in the 15 seconds I looked at them. So not a lot of analysis there. Otherwise, no hard and fast rules, man. Just kind of go and see what you can come up with. On to Steve, who is a recurring. So thank you again, Steve, for letting us know something. Hi, Dan and Josh. Again,
Hey.
Alphabetical. I have a quick question about names following a pleasant weekend reading the Theron Empire First Edition sourcebook and watching The Princess Bride. Does it get better? No, I don't think it does. In the Theron Edition book, the Theron Empire book, specifically the section on Talia, there was a lot of interesting material I missed back in the day around renaming. Both the Duke of Talia and the Pompate used this to great effect. Essentially, on taking on the title of Duke, there was a renaming ceremony that changes the candidate's true pattern, removing all existing talents and conferring new ones passed on by the role. To save Josh time, this is all on page 120 of the Theron Empire book, which I happen to have in my hat little hand right now, and I can read all this stuff to you. As I highlighted just the appropriate parts.
While Dan's looking that up, you people at home cannot see my face right now and the expressions that I'm making.
I'm reading, so I can't see them either. So I imagine Josh is like, oh, crap. Any progression made by this candidate on the ducal talents disciplines is then passed on to the next holder of the ducal title. Maybe Dread Pirate Roberts works in the same way with the name passed on to new candidates. So he was comparing the Princess Bride with this. I don't know. So his question finally has two parts. Is this mechanism for names still current canon for 4th edition? And how significant must the name be?
So to answer the first part of that question, as far as I'm concerned, it is not, because I didn't even remember that
was a thing.
That being a thing.
Fair.
I know that questions about naming and renaming come up not infrequently. Generally speaking, I am of the opinion that names and like renaming magic and that sort of thing should be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that most name givers actually really just because you're a name giver doesn't mean that you have the ability to rename stuff.
Fair.
I'm not sure that most people in the setting, even the learned scholars of, the library and things like that, really understand all of the finer points of naming magic. It's more that they have seen stuff and they have observed and gathered enough information that they have a reasonable hypothesis about how a lot of it works. But, for example, the formation of a group true pattern is a well-established ritual that they know creates a true pattern that has the name of the group that is determined sort of at the time of that ritual is performed. Yeah. But that is a very specific ritual format that has a very specific outcome in much the same way that enchanting, you have the design for the item and you follow this design and you get a certain outcome.
Yeah.
There's still a certain amount of art to it. There's still a certain amount of fudginess. But I think if somebody has a true name, it's kind of spoiler territory. To talk about why I am the way I am about renaming.
That's fine.
So I won't go there. But, dragons don't rename themselves, right? The dragons who, if anybody would have the ability to do funky stuff with naming, there is nothing to indicate that they do anything like that with any kind of frequency, which would seem to indicate to me that it is a big deal and not something to be done casually, because you can't always control what the consequences of such things are.
Fair.
I mean, it's possible. It is absolutely possible to rename things. But I think
This at least,
like, I am not of, like, for example, people talk about the Shivalahalas and the Tiskrang racial memory as a renaming sort of thing, and I'm not sure that I would consider it that.
Fair.
I don't know. It's not something that we have explored in depth. I don't know that it's something, like, as of right now, the whole thing in Talia about the Duke or whatever taking on the name of the previous one and losing everything. Like, it strikes me that there are so many ways that could go
sideways.
Badly sideways. Yeah.
Diagonally, yeah. So on to his second part of the question, which is, can the title name be set aside and the player therefore retakes their old name, likely with no progression while it was unheld? Again, this probably goes to your point just made a minute ago.
That, like, okay. So I don't have an easy answer to that.
No.
Like, here's my thought process. Okay, so if you're going to go to the point of renaming in the first place, like you were Joe.
Yes.
And you take on the name the Duke of Wetherington, and you decide that you don't want to be the Duke of Wetherington anymore and you want to go back to being Joe.
Yeah.
It's not like taking off a coat. It's not like there was a movie like many, many years ago that I seem to recall watching about a guy who became the Pope and didn't want to be the Pope anymore. And so, like, just went off into the Italian countryside and just kind of started living a normal life or something.
Yeah. Not that easy,
I think.
Fair.
But yeah, like, renaming in the first place is such a big deal. I don't doubt that there may be some magical ritual that they might do in Talia that might have some kind of impact on the new person to assume the title. But I think giving it up after the fact, like, the more you mess around with a true pattern like that, the more that could potentially go wrong. Like, we don't have, in 4th edition, we don't have depatterning.
Yeah.
Like, we haven't incorporated rules for depatterning, but it was something that existed in previous editions, like working on the idea that if you mess around with your pattern enough by incorporating a whole lot of blood charms and stuff, you could cause problems that could, like, cause you to basically unravel and turn into a pile of goo. Like, doing that sort of stuff with naming magic strikes me as similar.
I agree.
Like, you're messing around with fundamental cosmic forces
that you should not mess around with.
Those who do so casually do so at their own peril.
So for those of you who have the Theron Empire sourcebook, as Steve pointed out, it's on page 120. It's literally 2 paragraphs beginning at the second paragraph, and that's all that's mentioned. But it does require, because Robin Laws wrote most of this, I believe, and it's potential dukes require political connections, a radiant pedigree, and buckets of silver to get this done. So it's massively important and not to be taken lightly and hugely undertaken. Not just with a grain of salt or pound of salt, a salt lick, if I may say so. So thank you, Steve.
A salt mine.
Exactly, a salt mine. P.S. Just coming to the end of GMing a 6-month campaign through a slot at a local gaming cafe and been asked to do another run of Earthdawn on another evening. More people in the game. Good job, Steve.
Yeah.
Bring him in. So on to, I think this is Maddie. So Maddie wrote us a long one. I edited and truncated it because he said most of this was not available for...
I was going to say, I think he just had, like, a thing at the end.
I'm going to give first thing because we give him a shout out. I'm going to give him a second shout out. So hi, Dan and Josh. Just a note to thank you for the shout out at the end of EDSG episode 43. Radio Free Earthdawn is my previously threatened Earthdawn actual play, which I started putting to air because of feedback and encouragement privately received from Josh. So he didn't ask me, but by all means, go for it anyway. I did have an actual Earthdawn 4th edition related question to ask for your show, and it is this. I recently purchased the 1879 GM and Players books. I think also just like live now on Kickstarter, right?
The Companions just went live as a Kickstarter as of 2 days ago of this recording. It's already funded in like 8 hours. So
shameless plug.
But it's still got like another 3 weeks or whatever to run. More like 2 weeks or maybe 3 at the time that this episode drops. But if you have not checked out our Earthdawn's sister game, 1879, which is kind of based on the same core step system, but set in Victorian era, we've talked about it before. Yes. Now is a great time to get in because you can get a deal on a whole bunch of books.
Cool.
For
shameless
the
plug. So since he recently purchased the GM and Players books for 1879 and was having a read-through of the available 4-play races, and one of them jumped out at me as very interesting, the Saurid Hulk. Is there a Barsavian equivalent amongst the Tiskrang populations of the Fourth World? And if so, where can I find out about them? I have a fun idea brewing for a Hulk-like Tiskrang riverboat Sky Raiders, a la the Boatman conversion in Mystic Paths. Warmest regards. Thank you for support. Maddie Smith, First Circle Game Master, First Circle Podcaster. P.S. I probably dual disciplined a bit too soon, but who cares? I'm having fun.
There you go. No, there is nothing in any published Earthdawn material that is similar to the Saurid Hulk from the Gruv in 1879.
Fair. I don't know if the mechanics are similar because, like I said, it's based on the subsystem.
Yeah,
however.
Yeah, I mean, there really isn't much of anything that would necessarily prevent you from bringing it in stat-wise. It's just there's not really anything in Tiskrang culture that it is.
Fair. Sorry. Good luck with all that, but by all means, keep doing Radio Free Earthdawn. So, I've checked out one episode. I haven't done the rest because I've been a little bit busy. So, anyway, I will make time for them because he does promise that most of those will be less than half an hour or around a half an hour's listen time. So, on to Graham, our last one of the day. Hi, Josh and Dan. I'm a recent listener, so working through the back catalog and thoroughly enjoying them. Yay, us. I have played Earthdawn with my group for over 5 years now, on and off, and the current campaign is over 3 years old. My party is made up of 5 windlings and 1 troll. Pause for effect for everybody else listening. As they thought it would all be funny, and I let them get away with it when we started. The windling party is pretty chaotic, but actually makes fun gaming. Now the party are around Circle 6. We only play once a month and have run other games in the middle as well. Graham, I'm with you, do the same thing. So they can deal out a lot of damage, but they can't really take it. This is making it tricky to balance combat encounters, so I wonder if you have any advice on that side of things. It seems they either wipe the floor with opponents, or I'm at risk of killing the whole party. Thanks for your thoughts. Keep up the good work. Graham.
Yeah, it depends on what disciplines the windlings are. Fair. If you've got like most of them are like casters or specialists or whatever, then you're gonna run into some trouble with that. If you have, say, a windling cavalryman or windling warrior or something like that, the survivability talents that they can pick up and the durability that they get can make them a little bit less squishy. But that's something that you are gonna run into with any
party.
Windling, with any party. I have never run a group with that many windlings. I've had a group with 2. This was back in my sort of 3rd edition game. We had a windling Beastmaster and a windling Thief. The Beastmaster stayed single discipline. The Thief ended up picking up Warrior as a second discipline. Mm-hmm. But the Thief Warrior's physical defense was ungodly high because she wove a group pattern thread to her physical defense and had like a physical defense of like 20 something without even really needing to like bump talents or anything beyond that.
Holy crap.
So squishiness was not a concern because like anything that was powerful enough to consistently hit her would just shred everybody else.
Yeah.
And so I just basically resigned myself to the fact that she was not going to really get damage from physical combat and focus mostly on spells and area effects and things like that. It's a tough situation. I don't have any real advice for it except to perhaps
I'll toss in my 2 cents and see if Josh has any comments to add because maybe I'll inspire him to work around the problem in a different manner. I would make sure that everybody in your party, all the windlings and all in the troll, have the armor that they should have, or at least some decent armor. Make sure they've all upgraded properly. So that way, if they do get hit, they can absorb a little bit of the damage or make sure they're packing enough healing aids before they go anywhere. All the booster potions, all the healing potions, all the laugh salves, all, salve of closure, all that stuff. Make sure somebody's got it or that's spread out throughout the party. Just because, you got to do enough damage to hurt the troll to make it look like a real fight. And you don't want to, kill the windlings off immediately, but they should be able to take 1 or 2 blows. But if they have the right amount of armor, they can take a few more. Just saying. Because armor always works.
Again, it's tough to say without knowing what the discipline breakdown is. Like, if your only real physical combatant is the troll, and the windlings are all, specialists, but it sounds like, but they can do I mean, they're high enough circle now that if you've got windling spellcasters, they've probably got will force now, and able to bring a lot of ranged power to bear on situations as casters. If you get a windling archer in there, although I think you need to hit 7th circle to pick up flame arrow and really be able to turn things up. Although, windling being able to dump karma into mystic aim and true shot and things like that, you can get some decent damage increase just from rolling really high on your attack test and getting bonus damage that way. But yeah, it's a tough situation. I sometimes feel a little bit awkward in terms of trying to provide advice on, like, hey, I've got this problem in my group, and it's like a really sort of atypical group as far as party makeup and whatnot. And, I just kind of fall back on the Avatar The Last Airbender thing. Man, that's rough, buddy.
No, I think we've laid out the rules in the Game Master's Companion, or the Game Master's Guide, on here's how to make sure you're loading up the opposition to the party properly. Go by the stats, make sure the bad guys have these stats as well. Make sure, all those measurements are in there. That's a place to start. But maybe. Yeah. But also, again, if that party right now doesn't have the dynamic where they've figured out their tactics, maybe they sometimes deserve to get hurt until they learn.
Yeah. You mentioned the armor situation, and you do run into a tough situation with windlings because their carrying capacity and to still be able to fly, if you're playing rules as written, does mean that they're kind of limited by armor, but they're high enough circle that they probably should be able to have the funds to use forge armor. Yeah. To get a weaponsmith to boost their armor ratings and to take advantage of that, because you can get some nice resistance that way.
And if any of the combat types are windlings, Blood Pebbles should come pretty, I can't say cheap, but more affordable for a windling than it would for, if you got a combat type windling.
Yeah, I don't remember what the cost multiplier is for
windlings. I think get like a 20% discount, but
for windlings,
I thought they get 20% off, but something like that. I don't know.
Maybe, I don't know. Again, when you get to like 5th and 6th circle, the cost of Blood Pebble armor isn't really, the cost isn't the factor anymore. The cost is really a limiter for that in earlier circles. And unless you're being really stingy with your money, being able to pick it up, you've got to be able to afford training at 5th and 6th circle. And I think Blood Pebble armor costs less than training to 6th circle with a 6th circle master, according to the chart in the book. Yeah. So, again, it's not the monetary cost of the Blood Pebble that's the issue. It might be an issue having that extra blood magic damage, reducing your armor, your health ratings. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you.
If anybody has any suggestions or advice, please write in. Send us an email, edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Absolutely. So
with any suggestions or ideas that you might have that we did not cover.
When you ask these questions, we like more detail. We like our party's composed of XYZ races and XYZ disciplines. We can give you more information on that to go, I've got 5 casters in one combat type. Oh, well, that varies this up a little bit.
That's a very,
we work better with more information than less. So give it a shot. Like I said, the Game Master's Guide.
And it's one of those things, and this may be because you do have kind of an atypical group. This may be one of those things that you kind of need to bring up with the group and say, hey, this is a kind of thing that I'm a little bit concerned with, and I don't want to be too
punitive,
deadly with you guys. But there are here's the dynamic that I'm seeing, and are you guys okay with this level of risk? How do you have any ideas on how we could do this? Maybe we could have more obstacles and challenges not be combat based, but have them be other things.
Yeah.
I don't know. One of the problems with offering advice on people having issues in their games is that everybody's game and everybody's table dynamic and everybody's player character group, both the characters and the personalities and goals of the players are all radically different. And it is very difficult to
provide general advice, to a specific,
especially when we aren't given a lot of information.
Fair.
To say, like, to offer some practical advice.
And we probably should have given that advice 40 odd episodes ago.
It's
if you're going to ask for your group, tell us about your group.
But it's, my group is 1 troll and 5 windlings. I'm having trouble, in terms of balancing the combat encounters. Yeah, I can see that. I absolutely can see that. I don't have an easy solution for you.
That's a self-inflicted wound.
It's fine. If the group is having a good time, if you're all having fun, you're playing right. There's no problems there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of, especially when you get into those journeyman tiers and there's that, the slope of power spikes up a little bit in those, 5th and 6th circle.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be difficult to manage that transition as a GM and to figure out what will continue to be a challenge while continuing to maintain the style of play. And I think bringing your players in on that discussion is probably a good idea.
Yeah, no, my game master just 3 days ago was having the same problem because we have a party right now that can balloon from 2 people constantly playing to up to 7. And depends on who shows up that week. And he's like, I'm preparing for everything in the middle. So occasionally he's like, I've planned for 8, 7, 8 players, and 2 of you showed up. So he's like, how do I scale this back exactly to work? Because he's like, either I'm going to wipe out the 2 people I've got playing and their characters will die, or, I go too easy on you and it's I planned this combat to take an hour and a half and it took 30 minutes. So he's having the same problem. And because we're right on the cusp of 5th to 6th circle. So it's right there with you, man. My game master's having the same problem. So anyway, to Josh's point, if you have any further questions for us, we love answering emails, even though we may not always give you the right answer or the answer you're looking for. But feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. On to the second half of the episode, because that killed a good half hour for us there. We've had a lot of questions recently on dual disciplines and good fits, bad fits. So this is where I said this is the binary conversation we're going to have, which is you started off with 1, now you're looking to broaden your reach, and you're not playing a human with versatility. That's a whole separate discussion on a further down the line podcast. So we have.
So before we get into, I want to preface this with just a little thing, which is to say that what we are going to discuss here right now is just sort of with certain assumptions and information presented within the rules and how you typically kind of the typical presentation of the discipline, of the various disciplines and how things interact within that framework. It is absolutely possible that with sufficiently motivated creativity, you can get things that in theory should not work to work. And as long as everybody at your table is cool with it and it makes sense, then have fun.
Yes. The reason we play the games is to have fun. I have no problem with that preface at all because we just need to remember this is a game. We're here to have fun. If you can make it work with your game master or your players, whatever, by all means, work that shoehorn as hard as you possibly can to get that foot into that shoe. So way back when in the Adept's Way, first edition Adept's Way, they talked about each discipline and at the very end said these are good combinations of a second discipline to take on. So most of the time, the favorite second discipline ended up being the warrior, because I can't say one of the most versatile, but the most broadly generally useful. But it didn't always work with every single one of them. It was rare for like a warrior and an illusionist to come into play. And so I did this breakdown where certain ones were mentioned, and the favorite is always the warrior for second discipline. Second favorite ended up being the troubadour for second discipline. And the third favorite ended up being the scout, which was newer at the time when they brought it out. So this is, like I said, based upon first edition Adept's Way book, but I still think, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, most of these can probably still hold true.
Yeah, generally speaking, the discussions that, or the partnerships that are talked about between disciplines in the first edition Adept's Way are largely based upon the philosophies as presented within the Adept's Way.
Yes.
Like those essays, which while they do strongly influence the discipline design and the typical approach to them, are not the only way to play it. Hence my preface earlier. And there is a certain amount of influence that those discipline essays have on later development and 4th edition. And so for the most part, they would kind of hold true. If you've been following us all the way along, you know, we've talked about the core 15 disciplines that are in the player's guide and the philosophies and ideas for each of those. And occasionally we've talked about good multi-discipline combinations for them.
Yes.
But not anything that we've really kind of focused on hardcore.
So to give an example that I found was I can't say perfect, but this is the one laid out mostly. Because like I said, this is based upon the philosophy behind the discipline and not just that the talents either overlap or don't overlap or conflict. It's like you're starting off as an air sailor, and after a while you're like, well, this is kind of cool, but I want to pick up some Sky Raider talents. Well, the air sailor Sky Raider in the original Adept's Way was very opposed philosophically to one another. It's like Cavalryman eventually wants to learn how to, you know, take on some Nethermancer talents as well, and kind of dual discipline as that's concerned. Also, again, kind of an oppositional framework in that. So,
yeah.
So breaking down what I figured out through all of this, as far as, like I said, everything was listed out, and I put together a small little matrix that I showed Josh, and it's on an Excel spreadsheet. It's fun. The favorite spellcaster as a second discipline is the illusionist. And I think with the breakdown on we did with spirits recently and summoning, that I don't know if that would change at all. If the illusionist would still be like the favorite second discipline for if they're going to go a spellcaster route, if that would still be a thing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's we kind of had an email about this a few weeks back where somebody was asking the Windling Sky Raider that had the warrior in the weaponsmith in the group, and was like trying to figure out how to do them. We did kind of have a discussion about second disciplines, what was going on with that. I'm not sure, honestly, why illusionist tends to be, in the first edition context at least, why illusionist was the most popular magician that would be added in. And I don't know whether, again, I try not to think about disciplines within the framework of, oh, is this a good second discipline? What does this work well with? That because that's something that is on some level so personal to the character.
Agreed.
You know, like for example, we've in the Legends of Earthdawn game, the actual play game that I'm involved with, we've had a couple of characters that have picked up. We've had a couple of characters that have picked up second disciplines. Actually,
I know Scratch.
Maybe only
Scratch
one has actually picked up a second discipline. Scratch picked up Swordmaster in addition to Troubadour. We've got somebody picked up Questor
for Garland.
It hasn't happened in the released episodes yet, but we've got Scratch also picked up a path. Scratch is grabbing it. Scratch picked up Fire Eater. He did pick that up in the released episodes. Another member of the party has picked up a path.
Yes.
And I was kind of thinking about it with Virag, and if I were to go with a second discipline for her, and I don't know that I would, the only one that would seem to fit her would be Shaman because of the spirit connection, and that would just be an expansion of her association with the study of astral entities and spirits and things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I would actually do that without some kind of sufficient story motivation to do that.
Fair enough. For my characters, I rarely ever looked at anything to dual discipline in until they get high enough of a circle and go, this is insufficient to me in X way. I want to branch out and do these other things as well, usually to be useful or to explore my character's personality, to go, now I'm leaning this way based upon my experiences. But again, you know, we had the question pop in, I have this Sky Raider who wants to bring on this weaponsmith as a initiate Sky Raider, and you're like, well,
as an apprentice. Yeah.
That's just a philosophy that we mentioned. You talked about for like 15 minutes. May or may not work, but if the character can figure it out, fine. It's up to them and the game master if you're playing your character correctly, air quotes. But that's typically how I've always seen, multi-disciplines for my characters is there a motivation or is there something I'm missing here? And I think that in the 4th edition, the talent options flesh that out better for me to go, okay, there's a gap here. I can pick up that talent option at the next circle, and that's what makes me fill it out. So I've personally not looked at dual disciplines all that much, and my other players in the traditional 3rd edition Red Brick game that we're running right now have just started, 5th circle or 6th circle, looking at what can I possibly add on. And yeah, one of them was like, I'm playing this mage. I want to add on Troubadour because he just has this need to talk about himself. And that just all comes from his personality. So he's like, I want to go tell my own legends. And that's the character he's playing. And that's fine by me. He's a little egotistical, self-centered character. And I love it. The other one actually is going to probably do a Quester of Garland as well, because he's always been the one carrying all the healing aids, and he's just like, well, this isn't my wheelhouse. I need to get better at this. He's going to go, be a Quester for Garland and share all of that, because he's also all about family and team. So one of those things, I just figured we'd had a lot of questions recently about dual disciplines and exactly good combinations or bad combinations. Can you think of any inherently bad combinations right off the bat? Any of the disciplines we've talked about? We got some more coming down the pike.
Of the core 15, yeah. I think there are some that probably, like from a stereotypical standpoint, I still think that like Sky Raider and Air Sailor don't really mesh that well together, in part because they have kind of different approaches to things. Yeah. And I'm not sure what the other would gain from the partnership. Like if I'm an Air Sailor, what am I looking to get from Sky Raider that isn't already provided to me by being an Air Sailor and the sort of style of play that promotes, and vice versa. Yeah. If I'm a Sky Raider, if I'm the big aggressive rawr sort of aggressive fighting type, what am I going to be picking up from Air Sailor? Yeah, that makes that investment worthwhile. Even setting aside the traditional conflict of the Troll Sky Raider versus the Theron Air Sailor. If you're looking at like in the Throlic Navy kind of situation, like we discussed, what is one trying to gain from what is it that is gained through that partnership? Yeah. So let's go with a really bad example that came out of the books, which is you're a weaponsmith, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th circle, whatever, and all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I want to learn how to be a thief. Yeah, that would be a weird one. A lot of that would depend on what thiefly philosophy you are following, because you could sort of make an argument that the weaponsmith being interested in the sense in construction and building and creation and tools and trinkets and whatnot, being able to understand traps and the mechanisms thereof and being able to, and locks and that sort of thing, does have kind of a connection. But the civic mindedness of the weaponsmith kind of runs counter to the nature of the thief, that even if you're not playing like the selfish asshole thief, like Garlthic, for example, if you are playing more of someone in the gift of theft school, someone who is only looking to maybe take from those who deserve it, there is still a certain amount of anarchy and standing apart from society that goes along with the thief that doesn't necessarily gel well with the stereotypical notion of the weaponsmith as pillar of society, as the important individual, the social aspect that kind of goes along with that. So, those two, while there are some themes that you could see being very similar, philosophically, they could have a very hard time working together. Fair.
So one of my favorite oppositional second disciplines is you're beginning as a cavalryman. You're trained on that. You've got a mount. You're taking care of your animal. And you all of a sudden want to go learn to be a sky raider. Not the best career move for you. Or air sailor, really, because you're used to being on the ground, having control of an animal. And all of a sudden you want to take to the skies. Probably not the best one to do in any way, shape, or form there.
Sure. Yeah, another combination I think that probably wouldn't necessarily work so well from a stereotypical viewpoint approach would be Archer and Swordmaster. You would think with them both being sort of semi, combat-y disciplines, the Archer not quite so directly as the Swordmaster, but basically you would think that the Archer would would provide the ranged area that the Swordmaster lacks, and the Swordmaster would be able to enhance, like if things went badly, and would be able to provide the close combat support if the Archer were in a situation where they didn't have the capability to strike from a distance. But the Archer traditionally is very direct and to the point, and the Swordmaster is very like thinking in curves and thinking in style.
Yes.
You would be much more suited to see like an Archer and Warrior partnership than you would the Swordmaster because of that philosophical difference, where the Archer traditionally is very direct and to the point and not concerned so much with artifice, whereas the Swordmaster is as much presentation as practicality.
Yeah, because it depends upon which Robin Hood you'd like to play. Do you see Robin Hood as Kevin Costner, which is equal, bows and swords, or do you see him as more Errol Flynn, which is all sword and flash and style? So it's which Robin Hood do you see your character being in that regard? So no, I'm with you on that. One thing I thought was odd is a favored combination in the Adept's Way was if you start off as a weaponsmith and then you go become an archer to add that to your repertoire. I thought that was a little strange.
Well, I actually know that to a certain extent really makes sense to me, even not necessarily being aware that it's in there, because the Archer still has that weapon, that crafting, that aspect of things.
Yes.
And there is a like I was just saying with regards to the Archer versus the Swordmaster, there is a certain practicality and directness of the Archer that I think suits the down-to-earth quality of the weaponsmith very nicely. You probably wouldn't, if they were a weaponsmith and picked up Archer, they probably wouldn't be quite as severely mystical as the Archer essay in the Adept's Way, which is very like everything is arrows and targets and lines.
Yes.
But there's still that, like, there is a certain earthiness and practicality and directness that is both the Archer and the weaponsmith that I could see those actually working together very nicely. And the Archer would, they both tend to want a high perception. So like mechanically, they tend to work together very well. The Archer provides a lot of potential ranged support, and the weaponsmith is in a way kind of the support discipline. So no, I can see a lot of approaches for an Archer Swordmaster.
Yeah.
It's not very common, but bringing it up, it's like, I could actually see that working very nicely.
They said it was one of the more
without a whole lot of work.
It's listed in the book. It was one of the more favored ones. I just thought it was an odd take on it until it was explained, and your explanation is wonderful. There's one of those I hadn't thought of that. You are correct, because I think the Archers are more self-reliant because they can make their own bows and fletch their own arrows, and that's already leading into what the weaponsmith has already been able to do as well. So yeah, I could see those working once it was explained to me.
Yeah, I think the weaponsmith actually would be the one to lean more towards the crossbow than the longbow.
Fair.
Setting aside the whole discussion of which is actually the better weapon to have. But I would see the weaponsmith being, especially when you look at what is discussed with the bow archer versus the crossbow archer in that Adept's Way essay.
Yes. That
the crossbow archer is very like community oriented and would be even more strongly associated and in line with the weaponsmith's approach to things.
Totally. So to go along with another unlikely combination, or whether it's really, really hard to pull off, you're playing a Swordmaster, you get up in circles and go, you know what? He's just not devious enough. I'm going to play him as a thief next. So Swordmaster taking on Signisman of a thief.
Thief can... Thief can be... Like, Thief is very difficult, I think, to add on as a second discipline. I think it's a little bit easier to start as a thief and pick up something else than to go the other way.
I agree.
Because the thief, like, while they can bring some useful abilities at that point, especially if you're looking at the 4th edition way of things, usually you would be looking to go into Thief because you're looking to pick up like the trap related stuff, like the locating and disarming traps and disabling locks and things like that. And that is filled just as easily by a scout, which I think is a easier one to pick up as a secondary. There's a certain, like I said, sort of a fundamental anarchism and self-reliance to the thief.
Yeah.
That, you know, even for the more polite thieves, even for the more group-friendly thief player characters, would tend to be something that does not get brought on later for many disciplines, without like there being some kind of traumatic event that would push that character into being more self-reliant and not wanting to be, you know, sort of part of a group. Whereas picking up the common thief abilities for, you know, traps and maybe the surprise strike and whatnot, again, can be filled by the scout, and usually someone who starts off as a thief grows into being more as part of the group and will pick up a second discipline to help expand their contributions to the group in that way. That's like, I've seen a number of thief that picks up another discipline later, as opposed to another discipline that picks up thief.
Yeah, it's hard to, I agree, it's hard to add thief on later. It's one of those, thief can do their thing, and I think if they pick up a second one, that's a lot easier for them to do so. We've not talked about anything to do with a Beastmaster, because they're more of a specialization as well as a first discipline. And one of the favored combinations they gave in the Adept's Way was a Cavalryman as a second or a Warrior as a second.
Yeah. The Beastmaster Cavalryman kind of makes sense because they both play into the animal relationship, that basically the Beastmaster picking up Cavalryman would be maybe looking at having an animal companion or two that could be used as a mount, or the Cavalryman looking to get into some of the more the broader array of animal companion based talents that the Beastmaster has. So that's a partnership that can work pretty well. Warrior as a second for Beastmaster tends to be the one where you're less focused on the animal companion side of things and looking to broaden your capability as the sort of unarmed combatant. So that can work really well. Scout Beastmaster generally isn't necessary so much because the Beastmaster, like a lot of the stuff that you would maybe be picking up from the Scout is already available to the Beastmaster in terms of tracking or wilderness survival and things like that. So it's not something that like they would work really well together, but it's not really necessary. Like it doesn't feel like it covers any gaps. Although a Scout who would pick up Beastmaster later to like gain like the animal companion related stuff would make a certain amount of sense. Again, like the direction that you are going, what are you starting with and what are you picking up changes. Like a Beastmaster who is like a Beastmaster picking up Scout feels very different from a Scout who then picks up Beastmaster. Like what they are looking to gain from that change, from that expansion is sort of the key to the question. And that's one of the things that if you are looking at a second discipline, and I think that's one of those things that you should look at as a development of your character, because that's my personal style, and looking at the character as something that grows and changes over the length of a campaign, and doing that as a person, as something that reflects maybe their personality or goals or objectives, as opposed to just, oh, how can I bump my numbers up as high as I possibly can? Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that.
No.
But that's just my personal approach in terms of, I like to, when I'm playing, which isn't often, but when I'm playing, I like to have a character that I am portraying. And while I'm not huge into the method acting, let me really get into their head sort of thing, I like to develop them and think of them as a character, like out of a story or a novel or whatever, as opposed to just a collection of numbers that I'm using to smash stuff.
Yeah, no, fair. So we haven't talked much about the spellcasters, and we're 55 minutes or so in. So when you're starting off as a spellcaster, the list of second disciplines that comes in after that is a little bit shorter on the whole favored, combinations, because the elementalist only came up with really wizard as a second, or maybe common to do a weaponsmith.
Yeah.
And
Elementalist pairs with Weaponsmith fairly nicely, especially if you're looking at sort of the enchanting and crafting side of things.
Totally.
In 4th edition, it even gets a little bit more difficult to do multi-discipline magicians, just because of the cost that's involved in terms of learning new spells, since in 4th edition spells do cost legend points.
There you go.
It's already more expensive in some respects to be a magician compared to another discipline, and increasing that cost even more by needing to get a whole bunch of new spells on top of that. Just it can work.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit difficult. And also magicians, traditionally speaking, tend to be guarded of their magical secrets and less willing to initiate those who follow a different tradition into their own. And again, we're not even talking about the human who decides to pick up other thread weavings under versatility so that they can cast all of the spells.
Yes.
But just in terms of disciplines, spellcasters already have a little bit of a magic tax that's involved, and bringing a second spellcasting discipline on top of that is like compounds that even more. Oh no,
I going through the essays again, and if you're starting your first discipline off as Elementalist, Illusionist, or Nethermancer, and you're trying to pick up Wizard second, is favored for Elementalist, unlikely for Illusionist, and common for Nethermancer. But if you start off as a Wizard, picking up any of the other three was a favored combination, because I think, to the point, the Wizard looked at everything as a theoretical, and so they were just broadening their base after that. But everybody else was too narrowly pigeonholed to add Wizard on later, so they didn't like the scholarly aspect of it. So I think it depends upon where you come at it first, as opposed to second.
Talking about the direction.
Yeah. So just wanted to make that a little point there. So I figured this would generate a nice discussion for you and I figured it would generate a nice batch of questions from any listeners who are like, but what about? Thoughts on other changes for dual disciplines, or even a third discipline in the 4th edition? Other than it's serious legend point drain.
Yeah, third disciplines, like the difficulty of having a second discipline. Third discipline, you're looking at an order of magnitude more complex if you're really being serious about the role-playing and personality aspects of it, as opposed to just, whatever. I think now with the expanded Questor rules, with paths that have been developed in 4th edition, I think the need to pick up, like to go for a third or even a fourth discipline
is nuts.
Is a lot, like the need to do that is a lot lower. Yes. I don't know, picking up like a second discipline already strikes me as something that is supposed to be kind of significant and notable. I don't actually know of any characters in any games that I certainly know characters in any groups that I have been involved with personally as a player or GM picked up a third discipline, let alone a fourth.
No, fair.
And second disciplines were not super common. In fact, in my original Riders on the Storm campaign, that first really long campaign that I ran, nobody actually picked up a second discipline in the course of that campaign, in a sort of like coda story where Micah the Swordmaster kind of showed up in another campaign later on, or some stuff that he was talking about there, that he did pick up Air Sailor, I think, as a second discipline. He was a Swordmaster and picked up Air Sailor, and that seemed to work very well. But yeah, it's just, it's something that's there.
Yeah, no, fair. I figured it would just be, like I said, a nice discussion, because I do think that in 4th edition, like you said, with the development of the Questors and with the development of now the Mystic Paths in those group threads, that I think it's more varied options instead of just adding on a second discipline. And so you don't necessarily have to anymore, because you get other benefits from the Mystic Paths or the Questors, or I had one more in there that's gone off the top of my head. Anyway, but yeah, I figured it was just something to talk about, since we've had a few questions of it lately about second disciplines and or the viability of it, or the philosophy behind it in any kind of conflicts we had there. So I figured I'd bring up some old 1st edition stuff and see how it ported over to the 4th edition for all of our listeners. So
it seems to carry over for the most part pretty well, I think. We're both like ready for that segue into the closing moments of the show.
It's your turn, do it.
If you are interested in contributing to the conversation, if you have questions, comments, or ideas about multidiscipline characters and things that might or might not work, did you have an unusual combination in your own game, whether a character that was in your group or a character that you played?
Tell us how it worked.
That you made work in terms of an unusual combination, and you want to tell us about it and share that with the rest of the community, then by all means, send us an email. edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Totally. And otherwise, folks, you can find us on all the usual social media platforms. We've mentioned them a dozen times or so go back, listen to one of those episodes, figure out where we are. But until next time, it is time for you to go dual discipline your legend.
Good night, everybody.